Hey everybody, I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and other leaders maximize their potential, build rock-solid foundations for their businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. W.C. Fields said, "The best cure for insomnia is to get a lot of sleep." Well, on today's episode, we're going to dive deep on the topic of sleep, the impacts of poor quality sleep on your health, well-being, energy, and performance, what you need to know about optimizing your sleep, strategies and technologies to improve the quality of your sleep, and more. My guest is a behavior specialist known for her expertise in sleep science and her commitment to helping others improve their sleep quality. After suffering with insomnia and feeling like she had nowhere to turn, she took matters into her own hands. What she learned changed her life, and as a result, has changed the lives of hundreds of people she's worked with. Her clients include high performers, UFC fighters, entrepreneurs, and business professionals. In addition to her coaching services, she hosts a wildly successful and top-rated sleep podcast and writes a popular weekly sleep newsletter. Please welcome the creator of Sleep is a Skill, host of the Sleep is a Skill podcast, and the woman who's on a mission to change the conversation around sleep, Mollie Eastman. Mollie, it is so great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. Thank you for that generous introduction. And your voice is just perfect for this medium. This is fantastic. I was lulled into a nice meditative state listening to that. It was beautiful.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. I am so excited that you're here today. I know we're going to have a fantastic conversation around sleep, and I can guarantee you that all of those that are listening and watching right now, they are absolutely not going to fall asleep, but they're going to learn the tools and strategies they need to optimize and get the best quality sleep possible. So I'm really excited to be able to bring your insights and your wisdom to our listeners. So let's dive right in. I thought a good starting point for us would be first for you to share with all of us what your favorite thing is about yourself and why.
Oh, I love it. Okay, well, I think the thing that I'm going to share was both probably what got me into trouble with my sleep, part of the aspects, but it also ended up being a saving grace, in that one of the things that I have dealt with throughout the course of my life, and maybe listeners that might be struggling right now with their sleep or at certain points could relate, but a bit of obsessive tendencies, maybe overthinking, really ruminating, spiraling even on certain topics, for better or for worse. And certainly when I went through kind of this whole stretch of time of insomnia, when I was struggling with my sleep, I was riddled with that overthinking, being really stuck in my thoughts, and a sense of a struggle of how to get out of that. Now, on the bright side of that same sort of obsessive nature did absolutely shift and change the game for me on uncovering what was not working with my sleep and really transforming that area. But then on the bright side, then completely changing my life when instituting and bringing about some of the changes that I discovered in this research, kind of an investigative lens. And then from there, bringing that kind of obsessive quality to this area of sleep. And so I hope that it can land in a new way, shedding some new light. It's part of my commitment in this conversation, is hopefully some things that people haven't necessarily heard, or new ways that they could bring some of the latest in sleep science into their own lives. But yes, certainly that some of that obsessive nature can be both a blessing and a curse at different points.
Yes, it most definitely can. So I want to stay
Right.
on that here for a moment, and
Okay.
we're going to get to the bright side piece, right? But I think it's also important to
Totally.
stay on part of the dark side because that
Yes.
helps gives us a more well-rounded look as well as greater perspective and context behind your own story, your own experiences. So you talk about obsessive tendencies, you talk about spiraling, etc., being stuck in your thoughts. So give us a personal story that highlights that feeling and why you decided to use that as kind of the opener to where we're going to be going in our conversation. So, a personal story that really
Yeah.
magnifies that point.
Sure. So one thing that comes to mind is when I was at some of the lowest points with my sleep, I went to the doctors and left with sleeping pills. And I still remember the moment when I walked out and I had that prescription in hand. And actually, I was traveling at the time. So it was kind of an old school prescription. So they gave me Valium to deal with my sleep. And we do not suggest going in the direction of benzos for your sleep, sort of an antiquated approach. And yet, here I was holding a prescription for benzos to address that issue with my sleep. And it was particularly uh, unnerving and unsettling because I also came from a background of a family with a lot of, mental health issues and pharmaceutical use. And I had intimately known different family members that had been on long-term benzodiazepine use for beginning with their sleep and then spiraling into other reasons for that. And so that moment for me was very upsetting to say the least, but also one of my lowest kind of disempowered points of I'm going to still take this thing because I want to sleep and I'm desperate and I don't know what else to do. And yet beating myself up throughout that process because feeling like this is a sign for myself of failure, of this is how low my life has gotten. I can't do even something so basic you would think or primal or innate as to fall asleep. um, and so I had a lot of meaning wrapped up in just that simple prescription that I was holding. Um, but on the other side of it, what was great about that, I didn't see the silver lining at the moment, but what it ended up unfolding was kind of diving down the rabbit hole of understanding what in the world does it even take to get reliable, great sleep routinely. And it wasn't from a place of philosophical musings. It was from a place of I've got to figure this out. And at some of its lowest moments for me, there was scary, dark thoughts that I was having of if this is truly my life and the direction ahead, I'm scared of what this is going to look like, fearful that I'm stuck this way, and all around just a sense of kind of panic and upset around how do I get out of this and not feeling like there were clear options or places to go. I remember at one point sitting with my laptop and Googling like sleep support groups. Why is there no sleep AA, places to go so I don't feel so alone? Because it can be a very lonely period when you're staring at the ceiling at 4 a.m. and you've been up the entire night and you feel like you're the only weirdo that is dealing with this. Now, for anyone listening, spoiler alert, as you probably know, you're not alone if you're dealing with that, but it can feel that way. So I think in those moments, the great thing that I've seen for both myself and other people I've worked with sleep is sometimes it can put you in some of these situations when your sleep is not working, where you feel so at a loss that you might be willing to do some things that you might normally not be willing to do. And it actually ends up uncovering new ways of managing life, managing your thoughts, stress, environments. And then for me, it really uncovered this whole world of chronobiology, the science of time and how time affects your biology. So this was like an entirely new way of managing myself and my life that got unfolded, but it came out of that kind of low rock bottom moment.
So interesting, as you were in this dark rock bottom moment,
Yeah.
and because you mentioned that there's a family history with some mental health issues, were you
Yeah.
concerned at all at this particular point that
Yes.
I'm putting myself in that bucket too? I
Yes.
may have some of these same
100%.
mental issues. Okay, and
Oh, yeah.
did
Uh,
you,
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Just to underscore that, because it was a great point. That was part of where the fear was coming from, even leading, like, as this was all happening. So much of my life had been a balancing act of don't have some of these, don't follow in the path of some of my very close family members, and fearful that that was waiting for me. And so then when this happened, that was, oh no, is this the moment, was very much present.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So,
Yeah.
what was the turning point then for you? So, if you're at this dark point, and by the way, I just want to segue for just a moment, because you mentioned that you have all of these different thoughts, and when we're
Yeah.
under stressful situations, lack of sleep, we might make certain decisions that we wouldn't otherwise make, right? So,
Yeah.
and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but clearly lack of sleep also leads to cognitive decline. And when
Yes.
we have cognitive decline, we're also not thinking rationally, we're not thinking with the prefrontal cortex, and all kinds of things can happen that can short
Yes.
circuit, that can lead us down a path that we wouldn't normally take that path otherwise. So, the turning point for you, what was the actual switch? Or because you talked about learning about chronobiology and so forth, but what was really,
Mm.
let's, if we back it up just a little bit, what was the
Yeah.
very first thing that said to you, wait a minute, there's light at the end of the tunnel, right? I can take a step forward. This is a direction I need to go.
Yeah, so good. So one of the things was this moment of lots of searching, with my kind of obsessive tendencies, and one just basic website that I stumbled upon was someone who had also dealt with what I was putting myself in a bucket of kind of sleep anxiety. And we see that for a number of people when they're struggling with their sleep, when now they're starting to question their own ability to get sleep night after night. If you haven't dealt with this, you might say, well, you can always count on that you're going to get sleep when you go into your bed. But when you go through some of these periods of insomnia, it can become a question. Well, will I get sleep tonight, or how much, or what have you? And so with that sleep anxiety, it can be that fixation on sleep and strategizing and trying to get it right. And it becomes almost performance anxiety. And so all of those things can go in this bucket of the sleep anxiety. So I had found a website of just some blog where someone was sharing about their experience of they were there and now they're on the other side. And it's so basic, so simple, and yet that was exactly what I was looking for, were examples of people that had been where I was and now they made it through the other side without being dependent on long-term sleeping aids, which we know we have a lot of concerns about of using for the long term. And that was a big deal for me because I'd also seen the other side. There can be a lot of wild forums that you can find yourself on when you're not sleeping well. And I would definitely hear lots and abundance of the other side of it, of people that, oh, well, now I've been on Ambien for 22 years and I can barely sleep. I squeak out, 4.5 hours of sleep a night, or all of these sort of stories that are concerning. And so you can see those, but those examples of people having been where you are and having, light at the end of the tunnel, for me, that was really a big deal. And that's part of one of the reasons why I do like to share my story for people too, if they are struggling. And even if you're not, I know this is maybe a more extreme example, but even if you just have some inkling of your sleep's not quite as good as it was before, or you're questioning, could there be some improvement for you? That I hope this share can land in a way that says, oh, there's this whole other world that's available to me. And it could fall in the domain of a skill set. And like any skill, then it removes the I'm either good or bad false dichotomy and allows to emerge this ability to then suddenly it just becomes like a information exchange. It becomes an opportunity to practice certain things and see what works for you.
See, and I love that. And that's one of the things that I really appreciated about you as I was doing my due diligence and researching you
Mm.
and listening to some of your podcasts and your interviews and reading some of your newsletter information is just the way that you bring it down to the ground and tell your story in such a relatable way, which is also the reason why I asked you to give a personal example, because I think it kind of speaks to what happened with you. You came
Yeah.
across a personal story that landed, right? It was a connecting point for you. And if you've got
Yeah.
connection with people and they can relate to the story and you can help put them in your story, they become the hero of the story, all of a sudden the game changes. And I think that's exactly what has happened for you and the way that you're able to so effectively help those that you work with, and why I'm so excited that you're here today sharing with all of our listeners. So
Oh,
I
well, thank you for that. And it's amazing that you do the work to, kind of dive in and uncover for the guests that you're bringing on and to get max value for your listeners. It's like amazing.
well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. And that is certainly one of our big goals, no doubt about it. So the before we go into a different direction, because this is so relevant and current, I would love to talk about daylight saving time for a moment or
Oh,
two.
totally.
And so help us understand really the impact that daylight saving time has on our bodies, that it has on our sleep. What's happening when we're changing the time like that? And are you an advocate for, against, and what should we be paying attention to? Let's start with that, and then we'll see where the
Yeah.
conversation goes.
So good. Well, I think this is a perfect place to begin because it's a great illustration of how seemingly small shifts to our circadian management can really have real world fallout. So, meaning, I am a strong proponent of standard time and very much against daylight saving time.
Okay.
So we just recently shifted over to daylight saving time. And what that results in is then what could land or feel like for many people of, oh, we uncovered more sunlight. Yay, us. And yet the confusion lies in the fact that we have seasonal shifts that occurred naturally, regardless of any change to the clock or not, that would bring augmented stretches of sunlight. Either way you cut it when you go into spring and summer. And so that would just happen. However, daylight saving time often almost has good PR for the average individual nowadays based on how we're managing our sleep. Because when daylight saving time comes to town, it is benefiting from the fact that we are starting to make that seasonal shift regardless. So it can feel like this man-made construct where we are shifting artificially time that takes us away from sort of real time, if you will, or solar time, our closest approximation to actual real time. It's taking us off by about an hour and it's just shifting everything out and later. Now, this is problematic when this happens. We see all kinds of issues show up. We see heart attack rates go up. We see people deal with car accidents. We see a shift for even glucose management. A number of things have this fallout, not just the day of when the shift is made and you lose that proverbial 1 hour, if you will, but over time, what we're doing is we're setting up this mismatch of our social constructs of time and the actual real time. And so because it's kind of phase delaying us and throwing us out by an hour, it's creating a problem because as a society, we've already been phase delayed, meaning that we're going to bed later and later as a society regardless. So it's just kind of adding fuel to the fire. Now, this is a great illustration of how sensitive these clocks are in our body. And I've been given talks all over the place of what I believe to be one of the next big things in wellness being circadian rhythm entrainment, the understanding that our circadian rhythms have the ability to be kind of corralled, if you will, and strengthened to be either aligned with the rhythms of nature or misaligned. And a couple things that we see with that. So one, I've been saying the term circadian rhythm might help to understand that it breaks down to kind of circa, so around an hour, around 24 hours, so around a day. So when we break that down, we know that it's around 24 hours that's aligned with the rhythms of nature, aligned with sunrise and sunset. Now, previously, for thousands of years, when we lived outdoors, we were so intimately connected with those rhythms that it just sort of worked. We all were more tethered to the rising and the setting of the sun. When the sun would set, it was sort of party over for a long time. The first biohack, if you will, would have been fire. And so that would have artificially kind of extended our days a little bit. But even the nature of fire has kind of principles or wavelengths of light that are similar to the sun. So we would have that kind of rich red and infrared lights that are present in fire. So it was all kind of worked a bit more in harmony. And that's what we were exposed to thousands of years. Then 145 years ago, Edison created the light bulb. And with the light bulb, now the incandescent light bulb still was really in alignment with, if you look at the wavelengths of sunset and incandescent light bulbs, very similar. They have a lot of red and infrared light present in them, not too much of the blue centric pieces. Now, just last year in 2023 in the United States, incandescent light bulbs became illegal. So sadly, we cannot have access to those. And so what we're left with is that most of us are under LED lights. And LED lights, they came a bit more in vogue around the 80s, 90s, and now it's one of the few lights that you can really buy for most of us. The problem with that is that this is so problematic that just last year, a scientific consensus was released referencing, so it was coming from almost 250 circadian scientists, referencing nearly 2,700 peer-reviewed publications, and they're calling for one thing, and they want warning labels on light bulbs when used at night. So why would they risk their entire reputations? Their whole lives are given to studying circadian biology, and they're calling for this. So why would they do that? Well, they cite that simply the use of light bulbs, so just electric light at night, is resulting in not only that sleep-wake disruption and shifts and circadian mismanagement or misalignment, but also impacts on things that might be more unexpected. So cancer, diabetes, obesity, psychiatric disorders, reproductive disorders. So a whole laundry list of other things that might be more unexpected that are impacting our health and well-being. And of course, when we talk about psychiatric disorders, when we talk about diabetes, obesity, all these things don't bode well for our sleep results either. So they kind of have a snowballing effect. So why do I take all the time to, walk us through the history of light? Well, because we know that the most impactful zeitgeber or time giver for our circadian health actually comes from light dark management. And so that's the most powerful thing. So if you get nothing else out of what I'm talking about, know that your ability to create very bright days that you would have gotten if you're outside, and very dark nights is the whole game to getting great sleep and being aligned with these rhythms. Now, you take daylight saving time and you just, for no good reason, move the clock for an hour out. Now you're just further adding to the fire of circadian dysregulation that just about every single one of us are dealing with, because we have well over 99% of the modern day societies under some form of electric light. Therein lies a problem with our circadian management right there.
Okay, so there's a lot there, right? There's a lot
Yeah.
there to listen to unpack, to think about. So I'm going to make a suggestion to everyone that's watching and listening right now, because what you said, Mollie, is very important information for us to think about and to understand and to do some additional research on. So I would encourage everyone to go back and listen to this section of the recording again, and make sure, like me, that you are taking notes, good quality notes, that way you can commit this information to memory and ask better questions. So let's then talk about light-dark management. So knowing that we're under daylight saving time, right? And until something changes, we need to figure out how we adjust accordingly. And it impacts all of us, right? It does to a degree. It maybe affects people differently, but it absolutely has an impact. So what can we do specifically in terms of light-dark management? Is it just a matter of being in a lighted area for longer periods of time, trying to create a darker environment? What can we do? What should we be doing?
So good. Yes. So to put the container on this, the physics of light is a big topic, and it is nuanced, and it affects our health and biology and psychology in ways that we're only just really uncovering. Phototherapy is an entire area of study of how light has a drug-like effect on our biology. So it behooves us to think critically about the type of light environment we're in. So what would that look like? So one part of the thing that we're dealing with is what, I call the indoor issue. And that's the fact that we see that the average person is spending about 93% of their time indoors. And that's an old stat from 2001. It's probably much higher at this point. Since Netflix, since indoor kind of revolution, work from home, since pandemics, all the things that have brought us inside. So assuming that we're spending the majority of our lives in an indoor environment, right there, that's already hitting at our ability to get these bright days and dark nights. Why? Because one, getting light from windows is going to obstruct the quality of that light and changes and adulterates the frequency and wavelengths of that light. So what can we do? We want to physically get ourselves outside, particularly on the first half of the day, being this time of known as sunlight anchoring. This is coined by Dan Party, a researcher from Stanford. So sunlight anchoring would be that you're physically going outside, not wearing sunglasses, hats, anything that could obstruct the ability to get those wavelengths of light into your eyes, and they directly connect to your suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is this master clock choreographer that is communicating to trillions of other little clocks, your peripheral clocks in every cell and organ in your body, and they're looking to stay on time, and they want our guidance. And one of the most impactful ways to do that is to begin with that light. And it makes perfect sense, because if that kind of master clock is right behind the eyes, that's one of the main things that it can use as guidance. So you physically go outside each morning, and we're aiming to do this within 30 minutes upon awakening. Ideally, max an hour is the ideal that we'd like to create. So you go out there and you get that bright light in your eyes. Now, this would be different than getting it from behind a window. We see in certain studies it can take anywhere from 50 to 100 times longer to reset our master clock from behind a window than simply walking outside. And even if you're in a car, the obstruction of the light through those windows can be problematic. So you just rolling down the windows or, pushing the button down the windows. I always date myself with the rolling. And so, bringing down those windows to get the light through that kind of portion that even can be helpful in and of itself. That kind of goes into quantum biology and how a small change can make a measurable impact on your biology. So if you're starting there, that would be the first thing. If you get nothing else out of what I'm talking about, how could you design your mornings so that you are doing this? The clients that I have that go and walk their dogs, that can bring, a podcast outside, that can even just do things that maybe they'd normally be doing, checking their email, going on social media, whatever the heck you're going to do, but you're doing it outside. That is a win for your biology. Now, maybe there's more, beautiful meditative morning rituals than all that, but I would argue that is going to really set you up powerfully. Now, one of the other things that we see out of research from Dr. Sachin Panda's out of the Salk Institute is that it's very important for us to get stretches of time outside to create melatonin, which is confusing. And there's still a lot of questions on why would exposure to bright light by day helps support and bolster the amount of melatonin you're making at night. There's different theories, but the takeaway is getting about an hour throughout the course of your day thereafter. That seems to be really important to maximizing your ability to make melatonin in the evening. What further makes melatonin's been known as the vampire hormone or the hormone of darkness, but many of us aren't getting darkness in the evening like we used to. I mentioned the warning labels on light bulbs at night. So if you did nothing else, if we could shift over the main light bulbs that you're under in the evening to more fire-like hues, which we evolved around, so oranges, reds, then that can make a huge difference for our ability to create melatonin. One study found that even 30 minutes in ordinary room lighting, just, nothing wild, just ordinary room lighting, seemed to impair melatonin production by nearly 90%. So many people that are, looking to take melatonin, and it is a hormone, just to be aware. So taking melatonin just over the counter, and in other countries, there are certain countries that you do need a prescription to get melatonin. But before you start going to supplementing, even if we can just look at, are you creating it naturally on your own to its highest capabilities? And given that it's a master antioxidant, it's crucial for immune function. We saw it, popularized even more during COVID and with viral load. There's a lot of reasons why we would want to cultivate this. So what does that look like? Brighter days outside, darker nights when you're inside.
I love it. So let's stay on melatonin for a moment here.
Okay.
What happens to someone who is supplementing with melatonin and they take too much? What are the effects?
Some of the effects can be, grogginess the next day, particularly if you're not having a long enough sleep opportunity, which sadly a lot of people don't quite have. And then beyond that, we might see things like vivid dreams. And if people are dealing with some of those very vivid dreams, we might see more wake ups throughout the course of the night. So there can just be some added things that we might not expect from natural melatonin, the natural creation of melatonin. And then there's a whole different conversation around dosing of melatonin. So there is, and not to say that there's not efficacy, we do see with very high doses of melatonin seemingly being supportive in certain use cases like cancer, people dealing with cancers in certain areas that does appear to be some benefits. But then it also begs the question, if systemically, if so many of us are dealing with, unbeknownst to us, just simple, a 60-watt light bulb being on and really sucking our ability to create sufficient melatonin, could that support also aid in our ability to stave off some of these or just support immune function in that one example? It's an interesting thing to explore and costs really pretty much nothing to turn off the lights or switch it over to those fire-like colors. So it's kind of a low stakes game to explore.
I love it. That is so good. So in terms of the natural melatonin production, so if we're going outside as an example, right, getting into the sunlight, if within the first 30, preferably 30 to 60 minutes of waking. Do we know if the melatonin production is happening as a result of the sunlight exposure through our eyes only? Is it through our skin absorption? Do we have an answer to that, or do we not know for sure?
Yeah, then this topic does get a little more in the weeds. So one, I will say there's the higher dearth of research pointing to our clear evidence around from a circadian regulation perspective of light in the eyes. That's very established. There's more nuance in what it's looking like with photoreceptors in the skin. So that one's a little more murky. And what I will say is one aspect that's very clear is vitamin D production. And we know that innately comes from sun on the skin. And that one is really, really important to this conversation because we have a very large percentage of the population that is vitamin D deficient. And if vitamin D is this crucial aspect to the production of serotonin, and serotonin being a precursor to melatonin, then it's part of the cocktail of creating melatonin, is that vitamin D aspect. And there are some questions on is supplementing vitamin D, because many people will say, oh, well, I guess so many of us are deficient, so we just automatically supplement. There are some questions of, is that giving the same results that you would be getting from getting that sunlight hitting the skin? For instance, nitric oxide is an example where the hitting of sunlight on the skin seems to be a part of this process of properly creating nitric oxide that can help with things like nasal breathing for the men in the audience. That can be important for erections, for a number of things that we want to really kind of cultivate is, some of these downstream effects of getting that sunlight on our skin. That's just one example. There's a lot. So here's the problem. If many of us are indoors, as we pointed to, and not getting outside, then how can we possibly create sufficient vitamin D? Not to mention that where you choose to live on the latitude that you choose to reside on does either make this easier or more challenging. So for instance, I grew up in Maine on, bordering Canada, went to school in Syracuse, snowy Syracuse, and then lived in Manhattan for years and years and years. I did choose to move to Austin, to a lower latitude location, partly for the sun, to have more sunlight exposure, the ease of ability that it's pretty nice weather most of the year, or can be conducive to being outside. So knowing that health geography does impact your health and how you do set things up. Now, that's not to say you can't get healthy at any latitude, but you do want to be informed about what are some of the barriers that you might be at, given where you might live, and what are some of the other things that you could do to further support this. An important piece of this is knowing that we used to think melatonin was kind of just more of a brain-based phenomenon, that it was made in the brain only. Now we know that there's other aspects of how we create melatonin, namely mitochondrial production of melatonin. And if you're in a northern latitude location, you're not able to get that strong sun on your skin throughout the whole year. So for instance, when I was in New York, it's very challenging to get sufficient vitamin D from about October to say Marchish, when the sun is pretty, the strength of it is stretching across the horizon. So it's it's impaired and it's challenging to get that. And not to mention you're bundled up like an Eskimo most of the time. And so you're just really not exposing much of your skin. So you just want to be aware of those things. Do know that from the world of kind of biohacking, there are certain things that you could bring in if you're in a northern latitude location. So for instance, the Spurdy lamp got a lot of press during COVID. which is a lamp that you can create vitamin D from a lamp, which is interesting. There's another one called Chroma D that balances more red light in there. So from certain light sources that you could artificially create vitamin D will literally give you a sunburn if you use it too long. So there are aspects that and workarounds that you could explore.
That is so interesting, and I want to explore that a little bit further here in just a moment. But I'm curious when it comes to shift workers that are, let's say,
Yeah.
working night shift as an example, and I have a personal connection. My son often works the night shift, and when that happens, what can someone who is a shift worker do to try to optimize their sleep and also to be able to get as much light as possible, knowing that that's difficult for them, right?
Ugh, so much to say here. I'll try to make it succinct. One, I work with one of my kind of key groups that I work with are high stakes poker players. And they're a great example of this because they are often shift working very late into the evening, tournament schedules, all the things. And on top of that, they're in environments like a casino designed on purpose to confuse the circadian rhythm. No windows, no clocks, lots of stimuli, and just this kind of confusion and faux lights, and you don't necessarily know what's up or down.
It's a
So
dopamine
they're
buffet.
and a dopamine buffet, totally. Now they're a great example because they can feel like so foreign to the average listener. But I would make the argument that most of us are closer to them than we might realize. So we see many people having similar kind of ups, downs, all arounds with the management of their sleep. So they're going to bed on the week, certain schedules, and then waking up at totally different schedules on the weekends. It's no social jet lag. So it's another circadian dysfunction. We've got our smartphones that are very akin to slot machines. And we've got lots of dopamine as well that we're dealing with. So, and because of the fact that we're so indoor centric, we're dealing with a lot of those same struggles. So, noticing some of those problems and how we can learn to implement those in our own lives. Now, shift workers, very similar. We do know that even the World Health Organization has listed shift working as a possible carcinogen. And we do want to be aware that there does appear to be very clear real world impacts on working simply at a time when most of the world might be asleep, or most of, from a diurnal perspective. So we're awake when it's dark out and to the wee hours of the evening. So we know that really sets us up for some disadvantages. Why? Because we're diurnal creatures, meaning that we're meant to be active by day and at rest at night. So if we are, and that's not to we depend on our shift workers. A huge part of our workforce has shift work in it. They're crucial. And so we want to protect and help support them. So a couple things. One, it's really important for them to be in this conversation of learning what are the things that can support or hit their sleep even more so than the average person because they have so many things working against them. So one book that is kind of directed at shift workers is called The Sleep Fix. And that's by an ABC correspondent who kind of took a journalistic approach, and she was a night shift worker, if you will, and then put together a whole book to kind of help facilitate everyone sleeping, but particularly targeted in at shift workers. There's an app called the Shift Work app, and this is by Time Shifter. And Time Shifter happens to be an app that I would demand everyone get if they're going to be doing long haul travel. It uses the same algorithm that NASA uses to keep its astronauts on time, and in a beautifully kind of set up, way. So if you're doing long haul travel, please get that app. And then they did recently create the Shift Worker app. They're doing small batches of people, so you might have to be on a little wait list or what have you, but that is going to be really supportive for people because you can put in your shifts, especially if you are a rotating shift worker, which is just one of the most challenging, and aiming to get more education out for employers where possible to, if you have shift workers, if we can make it a lifestyle for them so that they just always work the whatever 1 a.m. to whatever shift, and that's just kind of how they set up their life 7 days a week, that would be much more preferable to, okay, this week your night shift, this week your morning shift. All of that confusion is akin to someone having to jump from whatever, New York to Hong Kong and back again and expect them to perform. I mean, it's a challenge.
Absolutely. It is very, very difficult. And I think having
Yeah,
someone like you who is an expert in this area, who can coach and work with organizations that have shift workers to help them understand the importance of scheduling
yeah,
the right way, consistency, right? I mean, there is obviously a dire importance to have shift
absolutely.
workers, right? But we can look at optimizing the schedules and timing and so forth to make it as palatable as possible to give them the ability to have regular schedules, to be able to sleep, to be able to optimize their own
Yeah,
performance. At the end of the day, it benefits everyone. But number one, we have to look out for each other's health and well-being. So I thank you for
couldn't agree
sharing
more.
that. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about technology. We've alluded to it a bit. You've mentioned some things. You've mentioned an app, and obviously we're going to link to all of this in the show notes as well. But what are you seeing today? What are some of the latest trends that you're investigating, that you're asking questions about, that you're doing your due diligence around, that you see that are really interesting technologies that work or at least have the promise of really changing the game for people who are struggling so much today?
Yeah, great question. So everyone we work with wears the Aura Ring, so that we can be getting metrics on how their sleep is performing from kind of a measurement standpoint, and then what happens as we bring in some of these behavioral shifts, environmental shifts, et cetera. So I think that can be a great place to begin, whether it's two of my favorites are Aura and Whoop right now. So starting, but even any sleep tracker, or even if you're really against technology, an old school sleep diary or sleep log to at least get some numbers. Now, that does miss a number of things if we are doing self-reporting on sleep, because we're often, I mean, some of the people listening that say, maybe they're not listening at this point because they might be the group that says, oh, this is not for me. I sleep great. The minute my head hits the pillow, I'm out. Those are actually that's a group that I have concerns about, because that's a big red flag that you're likely either dealing with sleep deprivation at the very least, as to why you'd be falling asleep so quickly. Because if you're really sleeping well, you should take a little bit of time to transition from an awake state to a sleep state, in around 15 minutes or so of sleep latency. And yet the other very common reason for that is undiagnosed sleep disorders. And there are a large amount of undiagnosed sleep disorders and a large amount of sleep disorders in general. So, one, I would say getting a sleep test, even an at-home sleep test, as far as the technology is concerned, and a lot of them are pretty affordable and easy. Now, one is Lofta, is a company in the United States that can be helpful for this. Empower Sleep, and I no affiliation with these companies, but it can help to just make this effortless. So you can just go on their site, get the thing, and it's sent to you. And so for usually less than maybe around $200 or something, you can test to see if you have a life-changing sleep disorder. And talk about productivity for the business-minded person or anyone. If you uncover something like sleep apnea, if you're snoring, if you know someone who's snoring, if it's leading itself to being disruptive to your sleep, upper area resistance syndrome, a lot of these respiratory-based disturbances, and those are just scratching the surface on some of these sleep disorders. Once we start treating these, then your whole experience of life can transform. So even just beginning with those two, but beyond that, I would say we have a lot of people wearing continuous glucose monitors. parameters because glucose disruption can result in disrupted sleep and commonly and frustratingly wake ups throughout the course of the night or just poor quality sleep. So that'd be another one. And then a new kind of category of what's being thought of as sleep enhancement. So sleep enhancement would be certain new uses of tech, like one is Somni that I'm interested in. And again, no affiliation with these, but what's interesting is they're using transcranial electric stimulation and exploring, can they enhance sleep beyond? So, everything we're talking about so far has been kind of sleep optimization. How can you improve the quality of your own innate sleep? Sleep enhancement could be a new category of like digital therapeutics that could support then augmenting your own results with things like your ability to fall asleep, to stay asleep. So minimizing sleep fragmentation and sleep duration. And that one happens to have Dr. Matthew Walker, who wrote Why We Sleep, and that's been a popular book in the sleep world and beyond. And so he's on the board for that one. So it's lending to some, interest in things like this.
Well, this is so good. I appreciate you sharing, and obviously we're just scratching the surface here, so we would encourage everyone to, again, go back, re-listen to this episode, refer back to your notes, do your own research as well. Make sure that you visit Mollie's website and all of her social handles, which we're going to link to in the show notes as well. Make sure also that you are listening to her podcast, which provides a wealth of information that's incredibly helpful. So definitely do that. So Mollie, as we are wrapping up our conversation, I could literally talk to you for hours.
Oh.
But as we're wrapping up our conversation, I would love it if you would share with our audience, give us a challenge. What is one thing that you would challenge all of us and me to do?
Okay. So I'm making this multifaceted. So my challenge is, it goes under that umbrella of bright days, dark nights. So what that would look like is just the one kind of behavioral change in the morning is the physically getting outside, getting that bright light in the eyes, or aiming for 10 minutes. So starting there. And then since I'm tagging on the bright days, dark nights, I would like to see just one light bulb switched out. So take one of your just normal light bulbs that's in your living room or wherever you're hanging out before bed, in the hours before bed, just switching just one to a fiery color. So an orange or red. It's going to look very brothely in your place, but we do these things for great sleep. And so shifting that out, you can get those on Amazon. We have on our store, sleepisaskill.com/store, some ideas. Most of them are Amazon things. So really just the ease by which you can do this. And those two things alone can really help Pavlovian style cue for you. Okay, so it's very bright. So that must mean that it's daytime. I'm going to do all daytime things. And then when it becomes very dark, that must mean that this is an opportunity for me to down-regulate, to calm, relax, and grant myself permission, which a lot of entrepreneurs, myself included, can struggle with, of saying, okay, yes, it is important for me to be off now.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And here is my final question to you. What is one of the most difficult decisions that you've had to make in the pursuit of the person who you are today?
That is interesting. I would say the most difficult and yet rewarding was switching who I knew myself to be when I finally, when I said, I still remember where I was when I gave my word to fully diving in on sleep as a skill. And I had had many entrepreneurial ventures before this kind of commitment, but I'd also seen for myself an identity of one of, okay, I'm going to test this out, but still have another foot in this other thing and what have you. And I remember vividly of this all in, not to use too many poker terms, but all in mentality on this venture. And I think while that was kind of new and a little unnerving and scary, it actually ended up being the fuel to really transforming how I showed up for this kind of mission, newly, very distinct from the other things that I'd taken on.
Wonderful. Well, this has been such an incredible conversation. I appreciate you sharing. I appreciate you being candid, telling about your personal story, sharing so much value, sharing your insights and your wisdom with all of us. I know you've made a difference here today. You'll continue to make a difference with the ripples that you create in the work that you do. And I want to thank you so very much. I'm grateful for you.
Oh, well, thank you so much for saying that. And thank you for setting up a forum like this to support conversations of this nature. I truly believe that if we all were to take on aspects like this in our well-being, I know you've got a whole season kind of devoted to that topic. It's so crucial and can fuel our results and our productivity and our ability to take on our businesses with gusto.
Absolutely. That is so true. And for all of you, thank you so very much for watching and for listening. And I do have a quick favor. Would you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts? Let us know what you thought about this particular episode. Share maybe one or two key insights that just landed with you. That would be greatly appreciated. That helps us expand our reach and attract amazing guests just like Mollie Eastman. As a matter of fact, while you are subscribing and leaving a review for Business Minds Coffee Chat, do exactly the same thing with Mollie's podcast. Go do that as well. I promise you it is going to be a life changer for you. You're going to learn, you're going to grow, and you're just going to become a better version of who you are today. So do us a favor and do that. And to enjoy more episodes, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click that podcast button. And until next time, keep learning and growing. Make sure to subscribe and listen to Mollie's podcast, and we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.